Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? These are words you might recognize because they come from the famous story of Snow White. Snow White is not only a popular German fairy tale, but it's also a popular Disney film, retold in many ways, in many different formats. This story has transcended time and has become beloved by so many, and I hope tonight it will become beloved by you as well. So please, relax, settle into bed, and cozy up under a blanket because it's time to listen to the story of Snow White. Once upon a time, a princess named Snow White lived in a castle with her father, the king, and her mother, the queen. Her father spent much time reminding his daughter that above all else, a royal family must be fair. And so he said, people all over the land come to this castle to settle disputes. And it's up to the ruler to hear each side and make a decision that's fair. The queen, Snow White's stepmother, knew how important being fair was to her husband. She went to the magic mirror and asked, Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? Snow White is the fairest of them all, said the magic mirror. What? Shouted the queen in surprise. No, no one is more fair than I. The queen must be best at everything. What's more fair than that? Snow White is the fairest of them all, the magic mirror said once again. The queen shook her fist in anger. What do you know? You're just a mirror. She threw a blanket over the mirror and stormed off. Still, the queen was bothered, so much so that the queen decided to be rid of the girl once and for all. I cannot wait another day to deal with her, she resolved. So the queen called for one of her most trustiest servants, a huntsman. Pointing her long fingernail, she said to him, Tomorrow, find a reason to take Snow White deep into the woods and kill her. The huntsman was shocked. But she was the queen. What could he do but obey her? So the next day, he took Snow White into the woods. As he drew his knife to slay her, Snow White turned around. Look, she said. She took from her pocket 6 perfect animal shapes carved of wood. I made them for you. Snow White, cried the huntsman, dropping to his knees. I can't do this. You must accept them. They are a gift, said Snow White. That's not what I meant, said the servant. How can I say this? The queen, your stepmother, ordered me to kill you. The huntsman dropped to his knees. But I cannot. She what? Snow White called out in alarm. You must run away, said the huntsman. Far away. Now, never go back to the castle. Snow White turned and ran as fast as she could back into the woods. Deeper and deeper into the darkening woods she did run. Somewhere within the forest, wolves began to howl. Snow White tripped and tore her skirt. She kept running, going as far as she could. She was scratched, bleeding, and scared, but ran till she could run no more. All of a sudden, a light blinked far off in the distance. Who could live so deep in the woods? She stepped closer and closer to the light and saw it was a cottage. But no sound came from the house, only a flickering light from the windows. "Hello," she said, knocking softly on the door. But there was no answer. The door was a little bit open. She opened it some more and stepped inside. "Hello. Is anyone home?" She looked around. What a mess! Maybe if I clean up in here, she thought, the ones who live here will let me stay the night. As she cleaned, she sang to herself and thought of someone. Before her father married the queen, her stepmother, a prince who lived in a nearby kingdom had come to visit. When he visited, they would walk in the royal gardens, telling each other stories of life at their various courts, and laugh at the oddities of the life that they led. However, once her father remarried, her stepmother had made a new rule: no more visitors. It wasn't seemly, she said in a firm voice. Now the prince had to slip over the castle gate in secret, and the prince would call out to her from under her bedroom window, and they could talk a bit that way. They would keep their voices low, so it wasn't as good as walking in the garden, but it was the best they could manage. Snow White began to fret. If she never returned to the castle again, would she ever get to see him again? What would he think of her when he came to visit and she was no longer there? After Snow White cleaned up the living room, she climbed up a ladder to the attic. Upstairs, 7 little beds, as if for children, were lined up in a row. Tired from cleaning, Snow White yawned and lay directly across all 7 beds. Before she could stretch out her arms, she was fast asleep. In the meantime, the 7 dwarves were headed home from a long day of working in the jewel mines. When they opened their door, you could imagine their surprise when they saw the cottage, glistening, the floor sparkling like diamonds. "What kind of magic is this?" said one of the dwarfs, rubbing his eyes in disbelief. He was grumpy. "I wouldn't mind more magic like this," said another dwarf with a grin. He was sneezy. "We better check the attic," said another dwarf. His name was Dog. "Something is strange around here. Take my word for it." "Well, we might as well go upstairs and see what we find." Much to their surprise, lying across all their beds was a young lady with a sweet face, fast asleep. "Who are you?" said all the dwarfs at once. Snow White bolted awake. The 7 dwarfs could tell she was as surprised as they were. When everyone calmed down, they told their stories. Snow White learned their names: Bashful, Dog, Dopey, Grumpy, Sleepy, and Sneezy. She told them about her life in the castle and her stepmother, and how her stepmother had tried to get the huntsman to kill her. But the huntsman had let her escape into the woods, and she could never go back home again. Stay here with us, said Bashful. How nice of you, said Snow White. But if I were to stay here, I would have to do something for all of you. You already cleaned up. Achoo, said Sneezy. It looks like there's more dusting to do, said Snow White. We could keep the house tidy as long as everyone pitches in. I could teach everyone what to do, and I'll do my share too, of course. That's fair, said Happy. You bet, Snow White nodded. There must be something else I could do for you, said Snow White. But the seven dwarfs only shrugged. Do you know how to read? Said Doc. We have books with wonderful pictures and would love to be able to read them. So it was agreed that Snow White would read to them all and teach them how to read as well. To celebrate their new friendship, Snow White and the seven dwarfs danced and sang and ate all night. The next morning, before they left to work, the seven dwarfs warned Snow White she must not open the door to anyone. After all, who knows what her evil stepmother might do? The princess nodded, and the dwarfs left the house. The princess prepared her first reading lesson. She also prepared a good hot meal for the seven dwarfs for when they returned later that night. And so the day passed. Back at the castle, the queen marched up to her magic mirror. Mirror, mirror on the wall, she demanded, who is the fairest of them all? Snow White is the fairest of them all, said the magic mirror. That's impossible, screamed the queen. She's no longer alive. Snow White lives, said the magic mirror. An image on the mirror showed Snow White living in the cottage of the seven dwarfs. Rage filled the queen's body. She screamed, Snow White will not get away with this. At the cottage of the dwarfs the next morning, when the dwarfs were away at work, there was a knock at the door. Who is it? Said Snow White. She remembered the warning of the dwarfs not to open the door to anyone. It's only a poor old woman, came a squeaking voice, selling apples. Yet in fact, it was the evil queen, disguised as an old woman. It's raining outside, dearie, said her voice to the door. Please let me in. Poor thing, thought Snow White, having to go door to door, selling apples in the rain. She opened the door. That's odd, she said, looking around. There's no rain. Just stopped, said the old woman, who was really the queen in disguise. Take a look at this big red apple. She put the apple in front of Snow White's face. Lovely, my dear, isn't it? For only a few coins, it is yours. I would very much like to buy your apple, said Snow White, but I have no money. The fine comb in your hair will make a good trade, said the old woman. All right then, said Snow White. She gave her comb to the old woman and took the apple in return. Snow White took a big bite, but alas, the fruit was poisoned. At once, Snow White swooned to the ground, where she fell into a very deep sleep. She is down, shouted the queen, raising her fists in victory. Just then the door flew open, and in marched the seven dwarfs home from the day's work. Shocked indeed, they found Snow White laying on the floor, and what must be her stepmother beside her, laughing with all her might. The seven dwarfs chased the evil queen out the door and into the storm. Up at the very top of the mountain, they chased her, when all of a sudden, lightning hit the mountain, and the queen fell. was never seen again. But nothing could help poor Snow White. She stayed absolutely still in her deep sleep. The seven dwarfs gently lifted her into a glass coffin. Day and night, they watched over her, weeping for sorrow. One day, the prince happened to ride by the dwarf's cottage. Ever since he learned that Snow White was missing at the castle, he knew something must have been terribly wrong. The prince hopped onto his horse and had been searching for her ever since. Now, he finally found her, but in such a state. The prince lifted the lid to the glass coffin. Her face seemed so fresh, even in that deep sleep. The prince gently took one of Snow White's hands in his own and kissed it. At once, Snow White's eyes opened. With love's first kiss, the evil queen's spell was gone forever. The seven dwarfs let out a big cheer. The Princess of White leaned towards each other, delighted to find each other again. They smiled. Now nothing stood in the way for Snow White and the prince to be together. They bid a fond farewell to the seven dwarfs and returned to the prince's kingdom, where they could live safe and free. Not before long, they were married, and they lived happily ever after. The end. Don't you love a story with a happy ending? I know I do. Thank you for joining me for today's story time. I hope you enjoyed the tale of Snow White, and I hope that listening to this video helped bring you just a little bit of joy. Remember that in this world, while some may appear to be evil, there is plenty of kindness to combat it, and it's up to all of us to be kind. If you enjoyed this story, please be sure to let me know, and maybe tell me what kind of story you would like to hear next in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe, to press the like button and the notification bell so you could stay up to date whenever there's a new upload. For now, I hope you have a good night. Goodbye. Goodbye.